can hear you somewhat better. If this is the best we're gonna get, then I guess it's the best we're gonna get. There's a bit of an audio feedback. So welcome, sir. Can you
Yeah,
hear us fine, sir?
yeah,
Okay, now that is way clearer, sir. So I guess it's a great time to start the space. So thank you everyone for showing up to our podcast, which is Sitrep, coordinated by the West Philippines, the WPS Defenders, which is a passionate group of online advocates here on Twitter based in the Philippines that wants to raise awareness on and advocacy for the sovereignty of the Philippines and the West Philippine Sea. So join us as we discuss pressing issues on not just the West Philippine Sea, but local geopolitics and local security issues. And we hope that you have a great podcast. We hope you enjoy our podcast. So our speaker. Wait, before we introduce our speaker for today, perhaps I can introduce myself. I'm at Ivan Koh. I'm a doctor based here in Manila, and I also cover politics here on Twitter. You can follow me at Ivan at home, and we can introduce Aaron also. Aaron, you want to say hi a bit and introduce what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Aaron Matthew Lariosa, freelance defense journalist based in Washington, D.C., mainly covering Philippine defense and security.
So thank you, Aaron, for being willing to co-host with me. Our guest this evening is Dr. Collin Koh. He is a senior fellow at the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies at RSIS in Singapore. His research interests are on naval affairs in the Indo-Pacific, focusing specifically on Southeast Asia. And Collin has published several op-ed, policy, and academic journals, as well as chapters and edited volumes covering his research areas. And he has also taught at the Singapore Armed Forces Professional Military Education and Training courses. And besides research and teaching, Collin also contributes his perspectives and views in various local and media outlets and participates in activities with geopolitical risk consultancy. So thank you, Collin, for appearing in our uh, space, and apologies for the technical difficulties earlier on.
not at all, Ivan. Thanks so much for inviting, and I want to apologize to everyone for the glitch on my side.
No, you're totally cool. It's fine, sir, and it's an honor to have you in our space, sir. Perhaps we can start with a more lighter question, sir. You've become known, especially here in Manila, in the local Twitter space, especially those focusing on defense, as a very popular account. Many people here follow you, and it's somewhat surprising sometimes, but surprising and a pleasant surprise at that, to see someone not in the Philippines being very focused on Philippine Twitter, on Philippine security, and on the West Philippine Sea. And your account is one of the go-to when it comes to covering the West Philippine Sea issues, latest disputes with China. I guess my first question would be, what really got you interested? I know it's your area of study, but why specifically, sir, have you been focusing a lot on the West Philippine Sea? What does it mean for you, and what really interests you on the territorial disputes between the Philippines and China?
Yeah, Ivan, I thank you so much for this question, and I somewhat would have expected that as well, because are some who might come across thinking that I'm an activist or some sort of advocate. As you kindly introduced me earlier, I'm a think tanker, and my main task is research. And of course, before I really go into the question of why I look at the Philippines within the space of looking at South China Sea disputes, let me give you a broad general overview so that everyone here knows where I'm coming from.
Of
Now,
course.
sometimes it does come across as confusing whether this person is an academic or he's an advocate or an activist, right? The thing is that, people like us, we do research, and very often we are generally known to have published in those various articles and whatnot. And this is generally what people think of us as doing on the day-to-day basis. I agree. This is my main task. I do publish from time to time, and of course, I only publish things I'm interested in. However, let me just say that disinformation, fake news, and whatever that is so much proliferated in the social media, they could not wait for the editorial process in whichever journal, publisher, or whichever op-ed outlet. You need to sometimes get in quickly, try to correct those erroneous news and erroneous comments on the social media, because very often it shakes public opinion. By the time your paper gets out into space, it would be too late. So that's where I'm coming from. And then the question on why I look at the Philippines allow me to see that I don't get all the various concerned ASEAN parties in the South China Sea. But the Philippines is one very interesting case study because it is me a very, very suitable litmus test when it comes to looking at the complexity of not just the South China Sea disputes per se, but also looking at generally how Southeast Asian countries engage in dynamics with the various extra-regional powers, whether you talk about China or you talk about the US or say other countries around the region like Japan, Australia, or even further afield, say in Europe. So the Philippines constitutes a very interesting yet and at the same time very important case study from policy perspective. It's important to note that the Philippines is a U.S. treaty ally. And at the same time, it is also one of the disputants in the South China Sea issues. So my hypothesis is that Philippines is important because, say, for example, if China is able to push its agenda successfully, notwithstanding the fact that the Philippines is a U.S. treaty ally, then the question would be, will that lead to what we could loosely term a domino effect on the other countries? Because the assumption here is that the Philippines, with a vacuum local superpower, is able to have concede its rights and sovereignty in the South China Sea to China. Then what will happen to the other parties in the South China Sea? Will that embolden China? That's why I've been looking at the Philippines and South China Sea issues ever since for a very long time, even before Duterte came to power. And of course, Duterte's 6 years in power has been a very interesting 6 years of observation on how the South China Sea issue evolved. So that is what I'm doing now. And of course, I might not have fully addressed your question, but I welcome you and other listeners to answer more questions pertaining to what I do.
Of course. And what we'll be doing is I'll be starting with about 4 to 5 questions on local geopolitics. And then I believe Aaron here has a series of questions on focus more on the AFP, the DNB, the defense sector. And then from there, afterwards, if we've got time, we can take questions from the audience, if that sounds good to you, sir.
Yep, no problem. I thought this is a free-willing discussion, so please feel free. Please feel free.
Of course. So our first question, you very well laid out an introduction to the West Philippines, to the ASEAN region, and then we can go into that, sir. What you mentioned in the 6th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum in 2022, that after the COVID pandemic, navies and coast guards will be limited in their resources and what they have available and what they have to spend. And this will be governed by many factors such as geopolitics, sovereign interests, their prestige, their capacity for modernization, etc. So perhaps as an introduction question, we can start by asking, can you paint us a general picture, sir, of the South China Sea from your vantage point, from Singapore, basically? And who are the major players? What is motivating them, like you said? What are the multiple interests we're looking at? And how do their navies play in with regards to those interests? Have you noticed any noteworthy developments since you've made that comment in 2022 after the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, Ivan, this is a very good question, and my prognosis back then I think continue to hold through today. And of course, that notwithstanding the fact that in the recent publication come out from, for example, Sitrep or some other outlets like has been observations of how, because of the war in Ukraine, there has been growing interest in spending more on defense. Now, definitely, in terms of absolute figures in defense spending, we are seeing, but then again, there are two main issues here. One is what type of spending are we looking at? Are we looking at capital spending, or are we looking at spending for say day-to-day overhead expenses, or say for example that's I think for the military, for many militaries that rely largely on professional manpower, there will be manpower costs itself. So that is one. Whether or not the money has gone into acquiring capital assets that actually leads to boosting those forces capacity is a question mark. So that is one. Second is that no matter how most of the Southeast Asian countries are trying to put in the money and try to recapitalize our forces, the issue here has always been that just isn't enough from two standpoints. One is that any of those countries in the South China Sea in Southeast Asia, they are themselves pretty considerable maritime coastal nations. And by that, it means having a huge maritime zone that spans across the entire EEZ, and of course, long coastline, and of course, porous maritime waters. There's just not enough going around. You could buy, and it could make headlines that you buy, say, just today, there is the news about the big Coast Guard getting some more OPVs from Japan. But pardon me for saying this, 5 OPVs adding to the existing one are still not enough for the Philippine maritime interest. So this is an ongoing issue, whether capacity could really be fulfilled in the short term, and given that a whole myriad of security issues to consider. I mean, it's not just about the South China Sea problems, but day-to-day mundane issues like, say, transnational crime, smuggling, and whatnot. So this is something that we have to bear in mind, that very often we tend to focus on these one big development of, say, acquiring a small fleet of vessels, but we have to don't just get the capabilities, but we have to look at the capacity. Capacity is very different thing from capability. So you could have, on the ship basis, an ultra modern OPV or Corvette, but if you don't have enough, then and that is instrumental for protecting presence in a sustainable manner, and it is basically just not sufficient. So going down into the very question that you posed me on who are the major players, of course, just looking at Southeast Asian, South China Sea parties, I will say, of course, the Philippines is a major player. It used not to be, given that decades ago, the Philippines is much more preoccupied with, say, internal security. But now the Philippines has started to shift its focus from an internal security focus to one that is on external security, and the South China Sea is definitely one in our focus area. Of course, Indonesia, Malaysia, they have been, consequential players, but then again, given that they are pretty much preoccupied with other things, and given that, Malaysia, for example, has its own issues with its naval and coast guard procurement program, it couldn't be really deemed as a major player for now. The prognosis is that the Malaysians are going to spend much more effort in domestic issues than really investing heavily and significantly on maritime forces. For Indonesia, it is of course trying to build up its forces, but given the expense of the Indonesia archipelago, the North China Sea is just simply one problem area out of many problem areas. So it is very difficult to envision Indonesia to step up even more than what it's doing now. Vietnam is definitely a major player, given that its strategic direction for its maritime forces is almost primarily focused on the South China Sea. And then these are just the major players amongst these Southeast Asian parties. But China is definitely, without any saying, right, that it is definitely a key player and is high consequential. Its maritime forces build-up has an impact on influencing regional build-up as well as the role played by extra regional powers. So yeah, I think I sort of laid out the key players, and I welcome any further discussion on that.
Yes, and a great way to segue to that, sir, is my third question. With the competing interests right now in ASEAN, and of course, no one wants war or no one wants tensions to flare up here. So, like, how does the ASEAN community seem to view the Philippine actions right now? Since you said the Philippines is emerging as a major player, how are we perceived by our neighbors? And do they think that we are doing exactly what's needed when it comes to facing Chinese aggression, like you said, or do they think that we're playing with fire, as several pro-China outlets are saying, or do they just not care? Well, what's the state of like perception when it comes to Manila in relation to the other ASEAN states?
Okay, so this is again a very good question, and allow me to just put a caveat here. No matter how other ASEAN countries were thinking about Manila's current strategy on South China Sea, it doesn't mean that what Manila is doing right now is wrong. Okay, this is very often sort of conflicted, right? Some people argue that if Southeast Asian countries were disagreeable with what Manila is doing, it means Manila is doing the wrong thing.
Yes, you see this with the local China lobby, which is why I'm very interested in your perception, sir, because you see local pro-Beijing outlets and individuals saying that, oh, look, the insert country here doesn't want us to go to war or think that we're playing with fire. We should follow what our Asian neighbors are saying, which is quite.
Yeah. So let me just lay out very generally what I've been hearing so far. Of course, across the other 9 ASEAN countries, there hasn't been a unanimous opinion of what Manila is doing. So allow me to just simply say that on the one hand, you have some of these countries, which I don't want to really name them, view Manila's actions as reckless because then this is very much what they view as not so much very Asian way of doing things. Of course, whatever this sort of narrative appears to align more with the Chinese narrative that this is not the Asian way of doing things. And then if you bring so-called Asian way of doing things means simply keeping a low profile, don't adopt what they call megaphone diplomacy, avoid naming and shaming, and avoid embarrassing the other party, and not giving the other party an off ramp to save face. This is a sort of narrative that that I hear from some of the ASEAN countries, which of course view Manila's actions with some concern. They view Manila's actions as a reckless. On the other hand, you have some who view Manila's action with quite a bit of ambivalence. And that ambivalence was very interesting because firstly, they were concerned that, of course, by opinion commenting about what Manila is doing doesn't do them any good. Because first of all, they could be construed by either party, whether Manila or Beijing, as trying to handle in the whole issue. Especially for those who are not South China Sea parties to begin with. So they will refrain from saying much because they don't want to be subject into the whole conversation and discourse about what's going on. And of course, sometimes they are afraid that it might somehow inadvertently lead them to ruffle the wrong feathers, especially with China, for example. So that is one consideration. The other is that well, they themselves might not be willing, at least at present, to emulate what Manila is doing, but it doesn't mean that they're not interested in watching and observing what Manila is doing and what is the ultimate outcome coming out from it. Because these countries, especially those who are as well South China Sea disputants, or parties in the South China Sea, they are as well trying to recalibrate their own policies, and they might potentially learn some lessons from the ongoing Philippine-China dynamic over the South China Sea. So by not speaking and by gradually trying to take it lesson and try to recalibrate their own strategy, they belong to the more ambivalent types of that. So far, as you are fully aware, none of the ASEAN countries have come out to speak on behalf of anyone. I mean, to be fair, they didn't speak on behalf of China, they didn't also speak on behalf of the Philippines. So they likely, come to the conclusion that, not speaking up is in fact the best strategy for now. And while at the same time, as I said, they are watching some with concern, some with ambivalence, but with a bit of interest in what the Philippines is doing.
And I guess going off from that question, you mentioned, it's a mix of either ambivalence and apathy, not necessarily empathy, but ambivalence or outright concern. And there seems to be increasing concern here in Manila, sir, that our ASEAN neighbors doesn't really seem to care about the West Philippine issue and are not interested in helping or at least voicing support for Manila's assertions in its claims in the West Philippine Sea. And you even have people that are generally reserved and pro-ASEAN, like Professor, your friend and our mutual Professor Richard Haydarian, voicing his concern about like where is ASEAN centrality. And you see recent polling right now, public opinion polling in the ASEAN states, where you have naturally countries like Singapore, Vietnam, and the Philippines, where there's an increasing alignment, public alignment towards the United States, whilst on the other end, again, countries that we're not going to name, they seem to be leaning more in China. And this seems to be presenting a view of ASEAN that's very divided. I would, I sometimes joke that ASEAN has as much coherence and as much centrality as my less coherence and centrality than my grandmother's mahjong club. So I guess my question here, sir, is ASEAN centrality dead? What is it even supposed to be, ASEAN centrality? And can we expect anything from ASEAN as a whole, or should we proceed with more bilateral discussions?
Yeah, this is a very loaded question, and those who are pro ASEAN and have been dying by ASEAN, they are going to like be really pieces for saying that.
You can answer as much as you can, sir. We understand.
So I would thank so much for asking this question, because it allows me to let out what I've been thinking about ASEAN now. This whole thing about ASEAN centrality appears in the various discourses, whether it is being rolled off terms of the ASEAN policy elites during ambush interviews or scripted conferences, or even in official documents, joint statements. Yeah, you will never get away with it. And of course, you'll find that extra regional powers love to use the word ASEAN centrality as some sort of a golden ticket into getting endorsement by ASEAN. So in other words, they have to say it, whether they believe it or not. They have to say it, because if they don't say it, then they don't get the entry into ASEAN architecture. And of course, it does lead to my one big question. Do ASEAN or do those other member states, all 10 of them, truly believe that there is such a thing called ASEAN centrality? Or is just something that is abstract and so often talked about, but no one could really define what exactly centrality is? Because by centrality, what does it truly mean? Does it mean ASEAN has a whole position in regional politics? Does it mean ASEAN take the lead in terms of running regional affairs? But what we are seeing here, unfortunately, is, while not counting that ASEAN does have its own success stories in trying to promote regional security on its own, like, say, for example, the case of the Malacca Strait Patrol or the Soonn Sea Bilateral framework, for example. But if you look at the way ASEAN has been dealing with security issues, generally, it is like emperor with clothes. I mean, it is a lot of talk about centrality, but the actual manifestation of policy action just doesn't reflect rhetoric. So that leads me to the one question. I mean, in the first place, will one actually trust ASEAN to step up on behalf of member states' problems with extra regional powers to begin with? We have, of course, instances where ASEAN step up, like the case of Myanmar back many years ago with the Saffron Revolution. Essentially, Myanmar made use of ASEAN and, of course, the clause about non-interference in domestic politics and affairs as a convenient cover to stave off what they deem to be responsibility to protect intervention by Western powers like France, for example. But other than that, if you go back to history, remember after Scarborough Shoal incident in April 2012, Manila had hoped that ASEAN will step up, speak on its behalf against China's aggression. Look, 3 months later, ASEAN failed to issue a joint communique, and because ASEAN just doesn't live up to its reputation as the regional architecture and its centrality, Manila had to launch a legal challenge against China. And the argument is that, one of which being that ASEAN just won't serve as a channel to resolve the issue with China. So fast forward to today, we are seeing some sort of deja vu, right? Essentially, ASEAN is just ASEAN, being the way it is because structurally, we have 10 member states with varying national interests and priorities. So you could never expect ASEAN to come together to make any statement in support of any member state, especially on issues that they themselves may not be so concerned about. I couldn't imagine Cambodia or Laos or Myanmar to be concerned about the South China Sea. When Thailand will be concerned when it is its turn to become the ASEAN chair. Other than that, you wouldn't hear Thailand say anything about the South China Sea, for example. So this is reality, Ivan. So I don't see ASEAN centrality as manifesting itself in a way that truly helps member states when dealing with all these security issues at the South China Sea with China. Maybe on economic front is doing well, but on security front, I think we have to temper our expectations.
So, like, just briefly, yes or no, sir? Can we expect anything from the Secretariat in Jakarta, or no? It's not happening anytime soon.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, you remember just earlier this year when ASEAN issued a joint statement on the South China Sea. Basically, it is not naming anyone, and it is not explicitly talking about any specific incident. It just rehashes those generic lines are statements coming from past statements. So essentially, it isn't really working. It just simply registers ASEAN general concern, but to see that as speaking up for the Philippines, I think is still pretty much short of that. Yeah.
And as you follow up, sir, you wrote frequently about the conduct, the code of conduct for the South China Sea, this unicorn that the ASEAN states seem to be chasing. Well, what's the status in that, and is it dead in the water too, or?
I have expected you to ask this question, so I'm glad you actually asked. And this is a big elephant in the room, right? That the code of conduct, which some for the right or wrong reasons pin a lot of hope onto. Suffice it to say, for the benefit of everyone here in the space, is that the code of conduct is what we term to be a conflict management tool. It is not a conflict resolution tool. In other words, signing the code doesn't resolve the South China Sea dispute. This dispute will be resolved either bilaterally or multilaterally, whatever form it will take. But the whole purpose here is simply what we call a confidence and security building measure. And it does, of course, promote a lot of ethical security cooperation. If you look at the single draft negotiated text, it is very big on private security cooperation, such as rescue and whatnot, and environmental protection. But when it comes to the real CSBM, this is where the code falls short. It does all. Because luckily, not many countries within the mix that are willing to only propose prescriptive CSBMs that could actually advance themselves in negotiation. Some likely believe that a so-called proposing those prescriptive measures, it might actually bog down the negotiation. It complicate the negotiation. So now, allow me to just briefly say, talk about the current state as it is. Yes, not long ago, ASEAN and China agreed on this so-called timeline to have the code conduct by 2026. I mean, if you ask me, I'm absolutely sick and tired of timelines because we've passed many of those timelines. one will argue, of course, that COVID-19 essentially facilitated the lapsing of earlier timeline. Let's just say that even before COVID-19 came about, one shouldn't put any hope on the timeline that was proposed before they talked about 2020, right? It wouldn't come about because largely the key issues of contention pre-COVID still exist post-COVID. And what are those issues? Issues pertaining to geographical scope of how the code could apply, whether it is the whole of the South China Sea, whether it applies to so-called nine dash line, or whether it applies to the spread is only or it should apply also to the parasite island. So that is the one issue that is not yet fully resolved among the various parties. So one, the second is of course a question about the role of extra regional parties. In other words, any parties outside the 11 parties are supposed to sign to the document. So the US, Australia, and all these parties, the question is, what role should be given to them? If they are not signatory, the question is, will they even respect the document, given that they're not even part of the negotiation to begin with, let alone signing onto it? Third issue is, of course, a question about whether it is binding, whether it's legally binding or not legally binding. That is, to me, not so much a key issue. Of course, I know the commentary out there over the past few years have been very big on the thing about binding or not binding. But to me, it's very simple. Whether it's binding or not is immaterial. If you can't resolve what we call the CVE problem, the CVE problem is a typical arms control problem, but it applies to the core conduct. It relates to what we call compliance, verification, and enforcement. If there's no way you could ensure compliance, verification, and enforcement, ensure there is a credible mechanism to go about implementing CVE, then whether it's binding or not is in fact a very premature discussion. So right now, as it is, the talks were restarted ever since after the 3 years of hiatus over COVID-19. But allow me to say that even before COVID-19, there has been issues that were not resolved, and I think some of the member states were more than happy that actually COVID-19 came about. I mean, not to say that COVID-19 is a good thing. COVID-19 allows them a very convenient excuse to simply say, look, we have to focus on domestic issues and tackling the COVID-19. So we have no time to really talk about the core conduct. And if you want to talk about the core conduct over Zoom or other things, we're concerned about the security problem. So let's wait until everything is over. So in a way, with the past 3 years of COVID-19, it's like kicking the can down, and then now they're back to square one. Given that the South China Sea issues have re-emerged, now there's reinvigorated effort to do that. And my view of that is because ASEAN had to be seen to be doing something. If ASEAN isn't seen to be doing something about the South China Sea, it further undermines its credibility and so-called the driver of the regional security architecture. So if we are here in the ongoing discussions over unresolved issues that dated pre-COVID, and I suppose this is going to take a long time. And if you have seen, the remarks from the various ASEAN statesmen, I think we are being hinted at, this is going to take a long time. And I think, understandably, it's going to really take a long time because you had to get the whole process restarted for COVID. And so when President Marcos Jr. ASEAN core conduct, I think that is the manifestation of the assumption that the actual core conduct with China is going to take a long time, and why not just simply go about having an intra-ASEAN core in place first. At the same time, I don't see much enthusiasm of the proposal. I think there is interest, but I don't see any other ASEAN member states concerned pushing for that so far. I think they wanted to avoid the impression that are keeping up on the actual conduct with China. Yeah.
So my last question, I'm very sorry to for taking your time.
No, at all.
That I don't want to rush it. So as we transition to more the defense and the security aspect of it, when it comes to the military with Aaron, my last question, sir, is you mentioned in your Jakarta speech that let me get the exact quote here, that we've got something to learn from the Ukraine war, and that, to quote you, it's instructive when it comes to the Southeast Asia. Therefore, Southeast Asian countries with smaller, weaker parties in the maritime domain, with relatively modest equipped navies, it is still possible to prevail in some circumstances against a stronger military. So it's something that I believe regional maritime forces should pay more attention to. So as we transition to the military aspect, sir, what are the reasons we can learn? What are the lessons we can learn from Ukraine when it comes to gray zone tactics? How can we apply them to ASEAN? How can we apply them specifically to the Philippine Sea and the Philippine Navy and Coast Guard?
Indeed, I believe ever since the annexation of Crimea in 2014, that it has so-called renewed interest in gray zone. Suffice it to say, gray zone is a label, but the underlying content and concepts behind them, behind that label, they aren't new. In fact, so this thing about the little green man that were observed in Crimea gave rise occurs to Professor and Eric's observation about so-called little blue man in the South China Sea that refer to the Chinese maritime pollution. And of course, it gave rise to cottage industry of studies on how to deal with the gray zone in the South China Sea. So there, I'm not going to rehash basically what is being talked about over those years until 2020. So my focus to your question will be lessons that could learn from the onset of the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And the lesson pertaining to the maritime domain, especially what we saw in the case of the sinking of the Russian fleet flagship Moskva, is very instrumental in allowing to learn that for a country with not a weak or even so-called no navy to speak of, being able to actually threaten a stronger naval power. Of course, it's something that validated what Julian Corbett used to say pertaining to how, a weaker party could still, in certain decisive circumstances, deal a blow against a much stronger adversary. Because what we call sea denial. In other words, Ukraine might not be able to fully use the seas, the Black Seas environment, but it will be in position to deny the Russians of free use of the Black Sea. So this is well manifested. Of course, after we saw the case of Ukraine and its prolific use of unmanned surface vehicles or USVs, and racked up quite a bit of victories against the Black Sea fleet, which is gradually weakening down, decimating the Black Sea fleet from time to time, and that forced the Black Sea fleet to relocate its key assets away from Sebastopol. So in a way, it translates into what we call to be a limited strategic victory of some sort at sea for Ukraine. It doesn't remove the Russian naval threat, but it does complicate the Russian naval threat. So in this respect, you could term that as a win for Ukraine. And what we mean that it foresaw, at least for now, an initially planned amphibious invasion of Odessa. So these lessons are instrumental for our learning when it comes to Southeast Asia generally, or even for the South China Sea. That with even limited military capabilities that are designed for sea denial, like say for example, shore-based anti-ship missiles or naval mines, for example, as well as other so asymmetric capabilities, even submarines. They may exist in small numbers, perhaps, but the end result would be that if it complicates the stronger adversary's naval planning or war planning, then essentially buys time, buys space, and buy what I would see as some freedom of maneuver for the weaker party. It might not be wholly decisive in achieving a strategic victory of sort, but it's something that we have to consider. Doesn't mean you are small and you doesn't use. We are in a situation where you either use it or you lose it. when it comes to the use of even limited naval capabilities. So one. Second is, in the case of Ukraine, I think it's important to note that Ukraine's successes in the Black Sea isn't just simply its own efforts solely. I mean, it played the most important role, but it does receive support from its Western allies when it comes to, say, ISR, targeting from Americans and other Western allies that allow them to target with a high level of precision those key installations in Sevastopol, as well as even mobile Russian naval targets in the Black Sea. So this also means that even for the small and weaker Southeast Asian militaries, this also means that building military interoperability and building close ties with stronger external parties is important, because in wartime you may have to rely on them for some sort of support. I mean, at least for the ISR and targeting. So, of course, the other thing, the last thing to note is that we are not just talking about capital ships. I mean, they are important capital assets like submarine, warships, and all that. But I think Ukraine's lesson fully amplified the need for Southeast Asian countries to seriously look at unmanned warfare. I mean, it has been talked about in many years in the past, but it has very often been more rhetoric, in what we call more hot air than actually you see the and spark. So for now, I think it is important for Southeast Asian countries to put in more investments in unmanned warfare. It is time to put emphasis on funding their local universities and other technical institutions in building, the basic scientific research capacity and innovation, and they can lead to, the creation of indigenous drone capacity. So this is something that is what I see as third lesson can learn from Ukraine. Yeah.
So we'll pass you on now to Aaron, who has been patiently waiting. My apologies to my co-host. He's got his own set of questions. And when you're ready, maybe, Aaron, we can start including, in between your questions, questions from the audience, like just this Hans questions here. At your discretion, of course. So feel free, ask away.
Yeah, sure. Nice talking with you finally, Colin. It's been a while. So great talk with the unmanned stuff, because I mean, my first question is, what do you think the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, or CADC, is going to look like? That's the new strategy being deployed by Manila. That's like the big thing they're saying. We're seeing a lot of movement from Philippine military leadership across the country to like scout operational bases. From an outside perspective, what do you think like this strategy has to do, both in procurement but also organizational changes, like the whole 9 yards?
Yeah, Aaron, first of all, it's great to be in this space with you after we interact, via other means. So it's great to have you here to answer this question on the CADC. Not much details transpired. So for me, being outsider looking at it with great interest, is that it come across to me, firstly, at least from initial stages, I don't see that as a sort of a single stage development, or the sort of one-off top development, because that go earlier to the kinetic defense strategy that the Philippines armed forces has been talking about and so conceptualizing. So to me, the initial impression I have is that at least at this current stage, what we're seeing here is the building of credible sea denial capability. A sea denial capability that allows the Philippines to be able to stave off external aggression out at sea. Even if it does mean that Philippines might not be able to use certain maritime areas within its legitimate maritime boundaries, it does mean that it has to complicate the adversary's naval planning and maneuver. We're looking at the sea denial approach simply as a reflection of the existing realities that were faced by the AFT, namely the fact that it is in the cusp of transiting from one that is focused on internal security to one that is external security. In other words, is a total overhaul of priorities in terms of equipping, in terms of training, in terms of doctrinal development, in terms of broader strategic thought behind it. It's going to take time. So the most initial effort is to be definitely to try a credible sea denial capability, and then ultimately, where it is going further in the future, once the concept develops further, and it will likely strive for what I see as limited sea control. And my last observation to that is that CADC, the message isn't just simply about AFP as the only actor. It definitely takes into account the role that will be played by, like-minded enemy external players, in particular the US, how the US could support it, how CADC actually could help to, in fact, facilitate the US campaign strategy in the first island chain, for example, which I think will largely will be geared towards sea control. And that is something big, and I believe only the US military has opportunity and the capacity or the wherewithal to accomplish so far. So these are my initial thoughts for the CADC. I welcome any further comments from
Yeah, and well, I mean, we talked about this earlier. You wanted some more of a conversation, so just to add on to that, A2AD, that seems to be more focused. I agree with initial observations. However, with the statements we're seeing from like Philippine military officials, it seems like they want to cover the exclusive economic zone as well. But this seems to create a bit of an issue with the focus of CADC, which seems preliminary, right? A2AD, but then we also have like these the China Coast Guard, the China Maritime Militia, all of like this, like again, it's a title, gray zone activity, low threshold of conflict activity happening with that area. So we have a very what seems to be conventional high end thinking concept being put forward to this, and I've had my discussions with others about this, and I don't exactly know how the DND or AFP will approach this issue, especially because it's CADC at the moment doesn't seem to really include the Philippine Coast Guard, which is the main force that would address these issues. So, like, what could we see from CADC, I guess, that could address like these issues around Scarborough Shoal, around Second Thomas Shoal, and all that?
So, yeah, this is a big issue, Aaron, because, end of the day, it does remind me that the AFP Act, for example, lists out a whole list and sundry of many things that AFP is obliged to cover. It's a whole broad swath of security issues, which also means that the West Philippine Sea security is time past its mandate. And if you recall, before the PCG emerges as a much more significant player, and very often we are only seeing the Philippine Navy assets patrolling the EEZ. So this is nothing as unique to the Philippines. In fact, look at Indonesia, for example. For all the talk about which is Indonesian Coast Guard taking on the frontline spearheading role for maritime security at small constabulary missions, the Indonesian Navy just isn't willing to keep it up. So in a way, we are settled with a structural reality. The structural reality that we have multiple agencies that overlapping interests with this maritime domain. So now the sort of actual more realistic question will be, how do we ensure that these agencies work together within those parameters? So CADC definitely is one that is geared towards a high-end, what we call high-intensity operational environment, meaning a warfighting scenario. Now, because the question will be, how does the Philippine Armed Forces tailor itself and calibrate its capabilities and calibrate its mission scope down to what we call the low-intensity operations, like what we saw in the case of reload, issues in the West Philippine Sea. So the way I see it is that it doesn't really matter who is the leading player. And the recent developments seem to point towards a positive direction. In other words, the PCG is the one leading the role, and the Philippine Navy, the one that is providing the support. That is me so far the right way to go. The issue here is, how do we ensure the PCG and the Philippine Navy, and for that purpose, other AFP branches or services, and even other civilian agencies like BFAR, for example, how do they work coherently in an interagency effort? I think this is something that what we see across the region, in Japan, for example, Malaysia, for example, there's been some ongoing effort to try to promote that interagency effort. But what I will say is that for the Philippines, this is even ever more urgent. It is urgent because there is already an ongoing problem, and so in other words, the Philippines is in fact doing well actually training. So doing well training is not a bad thing because ultimately the real lessons that were extracted from the various incidents out there in the West Philippine Sea could actually help to further refine the doctrine in promoting this interagency collaboration. So, Aaron, in other words, the general direction is actually correct. The issue here is now with the next 4 years under the current administration, this will continue. My question will be, post Marcos Jr., will this effort continue? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and I guess regarding, that interagency cooperation, I mean, I feel like especially the Philippines being really shaped to do this, especially with all the damaged assets, uh, a lot of rotation between different agencies. As we know, Philippine Coast Guardmen do partially man the BFAR vessels and otherwise. So that's a great point. One of the questions I always ask from people in the region, I guess, and I just want to drop it right here because I want to get into discussions and get to other people having questions is, what is the worst case scenario you could see for Manila and China and the broader region regarding a South China Sea incident?
Okay. So this is definitely a very loaded question. So let me think about some potential scenarios which I have looked into before. Because one scenario will be if given the very limited window and time isn't exactly working in favor of Manila, then will there become a point where Manila has no choice but to make use of this limited and closing window to rectify the issue with regard to the second commercial. As you know, the Sierra Madre, it has been there for many years, and from the practical point of view, this rusting hawk isn't going to last very long. It's a matter of time that it will be deemed unsafe to live on, and that also means that there is a chance that Manila has to rethink about whether it will want to maintain a presence on these features. China is betting on what I will tend to call the long game that so long as it's able to prevent the Filipinos from repairing or even building those structures on commercial to replace the Sierra Madre. Basically it will bet on the fact that Milan will one day come to terms with it and will settle for accommodation, and then will reach a point where you'll be Scarborough Shore 2.0. In other words, China might eventually not occupy the feature physically, but it will definitely start to cordon off second commercial and start to impose the same restrictions as it would for Scarborough Shore. So it will be Scarborough Shore 2.0, essentially for the second commercial. So that is one potential scenario in the long term. However, if Manila decides to push for the building of a permanent structure either this year or within the next 2 years, for example, then it is likely going to lead to something much bigger. It might potentially lead to a shooting war for sure. And of course, the question is very much hinged on whether the Americans will provide support. What kind of support are they going to provide? Will they be directly involved in helping Philippines create a permanent structure on the feature itself? And that leads to the question about what would that mean for Sino-US relations? Would that lead to a bigger regional conflict between China and the US? So this will be, the one scenario that we are faced with. So if, say, for example, the Americans are supportive of Manila's initiative to build a permanent structure, then it could jolly well mean that, Manila is simply just buying time. It is a matter of how long they prolong the gradual and so-called irreversible degradation of Sierra Madre as a viable structure on the structure itself. Short of a replacement, it could only mean that Manila will have to give in eventually to China, and this will become unpalatable to whichever incumbent administration in Manila. So it's something that will be hard to stomach, will be hard to swallow. Of course, it depends on who's the administration in power during that.
For sure. Do you think there's like any unilateral moves the Philippines could try to pursue without Americans? Just
Well, I mean, unilaterally, dealing a sort of a counter gray zone against China leads Philippines to a potential problem relating to material preponderance, right? This is something that is reality. I'm not trying to talk cold water or anyone, but putting it in real terms that counter gray zone does require you to have just endurance. The endurance comes from the fact that you must have the capacity. In example, what we saw over this 1 week, the civilian mission to Scarborough Shoal is a very good example of how you could actually overwhelm China, right? I mean, China has been swarming the Philippines. It's like Philippines swarming back China, and China sort of tasted its self own medicine. But it might actually be more sustainable for China to do it than for the Philippines to do it. So this is one concern to actually consider. And of course, the options for the Philippines to try to sustain its current holdings is going to take not just time, but does require sustained investment going forward. So even if we're talking about a gradual plan to rehabilitate the various garrisons in Kalayan Island Group, for example, it's going to take a while. It's going to take not just time, but also quite a bit of money. And whether or not the administration is able to support that, that is one big question. But what I do see going forward as a long-term guarantee is that one is continuing to bolster existing security ties with the US and with other interested like extra-regional party is definitely the way to go. It gives the Philippines more options to consider going forward as well. Second is that the ongoing AFP and civilian maritime forces build up, especially for the PCG, is definitely something that has to persist going forward. There is very little room for this to be put on the back burner, because once you put modernization progress on back burner, it will take quite a bit of time to get it restarted all over again, and then you left gaps capacity. So this has to continue. The current direction is correct. The third one is what we very seldom talk about is the need for the Philippines to acquire much more economic resilience. In other words, there is a need to try to diversify away from traditional markets. For example, China, which is of course a big export market. There is a need to continue with ongoing effort to diversify investments and export market. It's going to take a while, but we will only see the actual outcomes of this diversification, in the near future. But definitely, this has to go on. And the last point that I want to raise is societal resilience, something that has been much talked about regarding ongoing competing debates within the Philippines between the so-called pro-Chinese voices and pro-Filipino voices. So this is something that for thriving democracy like the Philippines is going to be an ongoing problem. Going forward, how do you best put in mechanisms and ensure societal resilience is something that will allow the Philippines to deal with the gray zone aggression more effectively in the long term? It's something that we have to look into. Yeah.
Just public announcement. We'll be taking questions from the audience if you guys are interested in requesting for speakership. But we can continue Aaron's questions in the meantime.
Yeah, just to respond to that point with the economic resilience, the Luzon corridor, as we saw from the U.S., Japan, Philippines trilateral, I thought that was one of the biggest things in the alliance in a while, because it really shows the priorities that are shifting to also include the economic aspects. Like this is the weakest part of the alliance, in my opinion, and I mostly track securities.
Yeah. Look, for example, the Quad started off as a hardcore security setup, and then gradually it sort of expanded into other areas like COVID-19 response, and then it started to talk about other softer areas. So I wouldn't be surprised that existing unilaterals like trilateral framework between the Philippines and the US, for example, could lead to something similar going forward. And might also we could actually entertain the possibility that more such unilaterals with other interested parties become the picture gradually as time goes. Yeah.
Here's a question from one of our audience members, Colin. So, what do you think about the preliminary reclaiming of Escoda Shoal by the by the PRC, by the Chinese Coast Guard? You saw, them dumping dead corals into the ocean, and it seems to be the start of a new reclamation project. Is it meant to be a warning, or is it a threat, or are they actually going to go through with it, Colin?
From the look of it, this is a good question. Because China had sort of pledged, especially in the recent years, that it will not build any new islands. So the ongoing development at the shore seems to point to otherwise. Because what else will you do when you haul those things in the waters? It leads to something. Right? So the modus operandi is similar to what we saw earlier with the massive island construction. So everything appears to be the same. So I don't see that period as a warning. In a way, the Chinese might have gone away with the impression that could actually implement a new plan for reclamation and accomplish even before the rest of the world knows about it. Look, when Chinese started doing all the land reclamation after 2013, it had managed to do it under the noses of almost everyone. Remember back then, when we persisted ISR capabilities, the Americans would have known something that's going on. It chose not to do that because that Obama administration was interested in with China more than anything else. So that is one thing. For the rest, the Philippines had very limited maritime domain awareness, and the Chinese were hoping that the Filipinos not observing anything, so they could actually gradually deal a conflict even before you guys know. All these messing of survey vessels doing all the various work is undeniable. Now, the shore itself is much closer to Palawan and Mission Reef, and it actually means that it allows the Chinese a much better vantage point in terms of intercepting any resupply and rotation mission coming up from the main islands of the Philippines to, say, for example, Second Thomas Shore. That is one. And because in conjunction with existing outpost in Mission Reef, it overlooks the reed banks or rectal banks up north, and there's an energy rich area. So the way I see it is, I don't think there's a warning per se, but I don't think the Chinese just want to warn. Chinese want to at least, acquire some vantage point that will give it much greater bargaining position vis-a-vis Manila by reclaiming land on the shore itself. So I don't see that just a scam. I think there is some real intention to turn that into something.
Thank you. So if no one else is going to ask questions or send it to me, we can go back to Aaron with this question. Cool.
Yeah, you're right. At least in Washington, what I see a lot of focus with the Philippines these days is energy security. I had the opportunity to talk with a lobby from Manila. The only reason they were in town is because CSIS was hosting a war game actually on what happens when the Malampaya natural gas field runs out. So could we see any future developments regarding like this energy stuff? Because it seems like 20% of Northern Luzon's energy that's going to be gone soon. And the Philippines doesn't really have the capacity to just buy it off the market like Japan or Korea does, but they have resources nearby. Do you think that could be like the source of of an upcoming, I guess, sleeper crisis, I suppose we could call it, that not a lot of people are looking at?
I would bring in a sort of a compelling narrative to that, because very often there is of course the assumption or a sort of scenario projection that if one day or whether or not energy truly runs out, at some point of time, the Philippines has to start to prospect offshore oil and gas resources. And so that will definitely lead to the speculation that there could be, conflict with China, for example. Right? Of course, as you and as our listeners here might be fully aware, is that China is definitely keen to enter into some sort of a joint exploration with the Philippines. But I think going forward, this is likely going to be ever more distant going forward. And of course, the Philippines has its own experience with such endeavors, such as, for example, the rather controversial joint marine seismic undertaking, or JMSU, during an Arroyo administration. So, it's without controversy that, you want to go ahead with this sort of energy exploration, and if there are any questions pertaining to the constitutionality and all other particular issues, including whether or not if you agree with China on, say, production sharing agreements, then does that mean that you de facto recognize China's claim when the first you should?
I think the Supreme Court already made a decision about that. I mean, considering the late contracts that Duterte was planning, they were deemed unconstitutional, precisely sovereignty issues.
Indeed. So that's the point I'm driving at. If the court has, already put in the verdict, my question is, will any future leaders be willing to entertain such, prospects of exploration without somehow inadvertently or accidentally touching on something so sensitive domestically? So, in other words, the verdict from the court actually might set a precedent going forward that, whichever administration in power will have to tread this very carefully without entering into a renew or repeat controversy that is similar. So because of that, of course, the option is, if you don't work with China, and how about working with other potential partners, say, for example, Japan, or even for the Americans or any other European energy majors, for example, right? So for me, it's simply a straightforward sort of linear argument. Because you do that, it leads to conflict. Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia has been undertaking their own respective oil and gas exploration in areas that China claims. China has so far been trying to intimidate them by, say, sending, deploying, the Navy ships or Coast Guard vessels crawling around those platforms out there. Most of the time, it's pretty safe. It is seldom actively harassed. After they do send in back channel and public protest against those activities. But for example, Malaysia, of course, the public of impression about Malaysia tends to be that Malaysia is simply just giving up to China on the South China Sea. If you look at the actual actions on the ground, it's far from that. Malaysia is pushing on with its offshore oil and gas exploration of Borneo. That is with respect to the EEZ or Sarawak. Those areas were within, Chinese claim 9-dash line. The Malaysians simply disregarded what the Chinese were talking about and just pushed ahead. The Chinese were, of course, sending the routine, military and Coast Guard presence around those oil rigs. But Malaysians continue with, personal contracts and all that. So what I do see here as a good lesson that Manila could drive upon, one is that Manila should go ahead with the oil and gas project, whether unilaterally or, of course, with extra regional partners. But what is most important here is you have to put a counter presence as well. You have to be firm in the position, have to be able to back up your activities and provide security for the contractors. Because end of the day, the offshore industry and energy industry, they aren't that concerned about who owns what. What they're more concerned about is security. If they are physically secure to carry out the prospecting work, you'll be there. If not, then you never get any work done in the areas. Going forward, this is what I think could be done, drawing lessons from Malaysia, for example.
we are once again taking questions if anyone's interested in getting up from the audience. Otherwise, Colin, so you would actively support the Philippines unilaterally setting up a presence there via an oil rig? Would that would count as a, as an actual presence asserting our claims? I mean, you can't remove an oil rig.
And yes, I mean, whether it be a drill ship, for example, a drill ship, is mobile, but if you put an oil rig, it is like de facto permanent, right?
Yeah.
So that became a kind of problem. But the thing is that, of course, from the process of transporting the oil rig till the time you install it and the time you operate it throughout its entire duration of the project, must be security, physical security. In other words, there must be no gap in which any other interested party which could disrupt those activities. So even though the support of that platform coming out from the main island of Palawan, for example, will have to be secured. So in other words, it's not just about sending the oil rig that there must be a guarantee of capacity. It goes back to my earlier point. You could talk about all those oil and gas activities. You could carry out some of those survey activities and identify those blocks. But to actually work on them, you need to have the real capacity to go securing those projects to begin. So, which means that the Philippine armed forces Coast Guard build up has to continue. I mean, there must be a commitment to that.
But what if they were Western or like Japanese or Korean drilling ships or construction companies? Would that further complicate, or would that further tilt the situation in our favor? Because they'd be less hesitant in harassing something from ExxonMobil, though.
So far, using Malaysia's example, I think a good question. So far, using Malaysia's example, Petronas has been working with other foreign partners, say from the US or Japan and all that. Because some projects in the Sarawak East were wholly by Petronas. So far, what I see here is that there hasn't been an overt attempt by any of those powers to try to ensure security. The one exception that we saw was the case of the West Capella drill ship incident back in 2020 that actually saw the Americans coming in actively intervening and try to fend off the Chinese. Of course, the Malaysians can debate on whether it is really effective. I hear some discordant voices from KL back then, but most of the time, it will be Malaysian maritime forces who are securing those platforms. So while, of course, working with extra regional partners may bring in the potential of the armed military intervention to secure them, but what I will advise is that Manila shouldn't too much hope on that. I think for the most part, Manila will be expected to be the one providing the security, not the other players. Yeah.
Aaron, do you've got any more questions?
Yeah, we talk a lot about Manila and like the people in leadership. Overall, though, like everything that's happened in the past year, the new transparency, Marco's assertiveness. Do you think like what benefits are we seeing? And some of the voices I also hear is it might be transparent, but it's also what's the next step? How does the Philippines actually use all this political capital and all this attention to its advantage? And as we saw a couple of weeks ago, as we discussed the water cannon announcement, where they announced we wouldn't, escalate tensions. I feel like we have a mutual bit of a hesitation or disagreement on that ultimate decision. But I mean, what do you think Manila should do now? Because all eyes are on Manila. Unfortunately, the Transparency Initiative doesn't seem to have blunt China's aggression in all these incidents, and I honestly don't get the point of it going forward, because we already have all the results. Everybody's aware, everybody knows what's happening, but what actually happens now? I'd like to further the discussion we previously had. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Eric, we had these WhatsApp discussion about the water cannon policy, and of course, I was somewhat puzzled, because the use of water cannon isn't necessarily aggressive. Of course, it is not definitely the first resort that one should do, But it will reach a point of time where, some of those toolkits that you assiduously try to use, it had to be used if they fall short of the usability performance, right? So in a way, water cannon, well, is kinetic, but you use it judiciously and carefully, it may not lead to consequences. The Chinese were using that pretty aggressively. No one should follow what the Chinese were doing. But allow me to say that the transparency as a policy is definitely an ongoing project. There is no end to that. Once you set as a transparency, you have to be assertively transparent all the way. It has to be independent of whichever administration comes in power, for example. Because once you stop that, essentially you start to lose the narrative. Because assertive transparency allows you to do a few things. One, it allows you, as you mentioned, to put everything into the limelight, in public limelight, whether in domestic public, in Philippines, which is of course an important audience, as well as the broader international community. It's no longer sufficient simply to just say it words, your own narrative. You need to put in, the video footages, you put in AIS tracking data, you put in images to impress upon what is actually happening on the ground. And then you start to try to shape the narrative, and you try to ensure that the right things are coming out, and you try to use that to tackle this information coming from the other side. So this is important moving forward, and it serves another purpose. The other purpose is, while it secures international support, it also serves as an evidence repository. It's a repository of evidences that you have going forward, whether you are going to launch a new legal case, or for example, if there's an untoward incident that could be inadvertent happening out in the South China Sea, could use as a way to redress your grievances, to seek justice from that. So therefore, while it doesn't roll back the Chinese, the way I see it is it does hold the utility of deterring the Chinese from doing anything more drastic. And I will agree that it does have some effect. Since it was being announced and used after the laser pointing incident last February, Chinese essentially go on the back. The Chinese tactics so far that we saw were largely what we call horizontal escalation and not vertical escalation. In other words, it is intensifying what it has been using in its toolbox, but it has not yet actually amped up into doing something more drastic. So it does really show that there are some limitations that Chinese are facing right now because of the transparency. But your question, so well, Mr. Purdue, should we just continue to hold it as it is? Then it leads to what we call a strategic stalemate. Of course, it does consider initiating the Chinese still what they are doing. They reach a point of time where incidents happen. So what I say is this assertive transparency ought to allow more options. In other words, assertive transparency and the environment and the conditions that were created because of that should allow vanilla policymakers to revisit and to recalibrate the set of options they have, to broaden those options and not to constrain themselves even further. Therefore, going forward, options that we should consider. Of course, I'm not in the position to say much, but going back to the water cannon issue, this is one issue that I believe shouldn't be foreclosed. It shouldn't be seen as just simply, don't use it, and mean don't use it. I mean, if you reach a point of time, it may be optional to use it. It's a matter of signaling to the Chinese and whether it should be used or not, instead of just simply foreclosing it as a policy.
What would you consider because you mentioned the sort of transparency has put constraints on them, but at least the way I track it, of course I do recall they happened before, but the way I track it was especially in fall and spring, it was in the spring, they went from trying to block them to rammings, water cannons, and then water cannons aimed at ship compartments. Like in my opinion, at least, I feel like it's only gotten a bit worse.
Sure. Yes. So far, all these things are applied to the Philippines is something maybe new. but they are not new to, say, for example, Vietnam, for example. So whenever I saw what happening lately in the West Pacific between and China, to me, they are new. The Vietnamese were the receiving end for. But the only difference is because approach that Vietnam has decided to undertake is different from Manila. But at the end of the day, let's assume that if Vietnam adopts their approach, then it might actually be more effective. For now, it seems like Manila is alone, but it does mean that Manila has capitalized on the transparent approach to prevent China from vertically escalating. I think that is the one. Maybe the best hope we have is China refraining from vertical escalating. But even horizontal escalation could lead to something worse, as you mentioned, that when the use of water cannon, in terms of technical aspect of it, is just simply raining water near your bow from actually aiming at you and aiming at the vital systems is something that is still part of horizontal escalation, but definitely lead to something untoward as well.
All right. We've got a question from our audience members, and one of them was asking, say in the event the Philippines did have everything necessary in order to begin oil drilling, well, what do you think are the chances that, based on what you're hearing, that Manila will actually begin energy exploration in disputed areas? At least your calculation.
Well, I think the best